morning. Happy Sabbath. My name is Alex Bowen, and I am here to have the literature evangelism focus. I must preemptively apologize if I seem note-bound. I have written notes down for myself because what I have to share, I do not share lightly, and I do not wish to misspeak. You see, I'm excited to share some very interesting literature with you today that I hope will be a spark of a conversation you can have with someone in your sphere of influence. But first, I have a question. How many of you, by show of hands, firmly believe that you are Protestant? Good. I have a couple show-and-tell items that would interest true Protestants. Both items, took considerable effort to get and quite a bit of patience and time. One represents a venerable piece of Scripture, while the other is a historic book. These texts stand in stark contrast, epitomizing two fundamentally opposing paradigms. I wish to talk of the book first. It looks old, doesn't it? But just how old is this book? We must take a trip back through history lane for perspective through some of the recent wars on our planet. In 1955, when the Vietnam War broke out, this book was sitting on a shelf already quite ancient. In 1945, as Seventh-day Adventist Desmond Doss, who our Veterans Park here in Collegedale was dedicated to, was rescuing his comrades and lowering them down a cliff in Okinawa in World War II, this book was still ancient, sitting on a shelf collecting dust. In 1914, as the First World War broke out, it was sitting on a shelf. In 1861, when the American Civil War broke out, it was sitting on a shelf. Almost 50 years earlier, during the War of 1812, it was on a shelf. In 1798, at the end of the 1260 and 1290-year prophecies, as the French Revolution broke out and convulsed France, and the blood of royals ran like water in the streets, and the time of the end began prophetically, it was sitting on a shelf. In 1776, when the fledgling colonies declared their independence and Paul Revere made his famous ride, as prophecy was fulfilled and the rise of the lamb-like beast spoken of in Revelation took place, this book was sitting on a shelf. Before the early 1700s, when Sir Isaac Newton interpreted Revelation's description of the Antichrist power as being a description of the papacy, before the 1600s, while reformers like Drew Kressner were alive, and before the late 1500s, when others like John Foxe, author of Foxe's Book of Martyrs, John Napier, Andreas Hellwig, and many others, and they correctly identified who the beast power was, this book was sitting on a shelf. You see, this book right here was printed in 1559. The leather that wraps it is from a cow that died 4 centuries ago. But why would I bring an ancient book written in Latin, a book with the occasional hole in it from literal bookworms eating their way through it because it's so old, to show a bunch of fellow Protestants? Because, my brothers and sisters, it is a smoking gun. It contains pure distilled blasphemy and also has evidence of a direct fulfillment of Revelation 13, and it shows who the Antichrist power is. It is a book of Catholic canon law called a Decretum Gratiani, or translated to English, the word decretum means decree. I will point out a few pertinent excerpts. The first is that on page 53, Distinctio 19, once translated to English, it relates that these decretal epistles were to be co-enumerated with canonical scripture. In layman's terms, this was to be treated with the same authority as the Bible. That tells you just how authoritative it was considered. Do you think anything can be placed on the same plane as Scripture? Another point is on page 131, Distinctio 40. If the Pope should be found, and this is a quote, if the Pope should be found negligent, deficient, and should otherwise lead innumerable people to hell, with himself to be bound there with plagues for eternity, no man may judge him, for he is to judge all, and no man him. Where are they placing the Pope with this statement? A third point is on page 314, Distinctio 96. This is another quote. It is quite clearly shown that the pontiff cannot be bound by the secular power, which is evidently called a god by the pious Prince Constantine, since it is evident that even a god cannot be judged by men. What is this calling the Pope? On page 870 of this book, there is another quote, written by Pope Gregory XIII and put in this book of canon law. Enemies of the ecclesiastical religion must be coerced by arms. What does it mean to be coerced by arms? The same pope who wrote that also minted a coin, which I have a picture of. You guys can take a look at this afterwards. If you look at the right-hand one, this one right here, it is celebrating St. Bartholomew's Massacre. It shows an angel standing over the bodies of dead Huguenots, Protestants. St. Bartholomew's Massacre occurred in 1572, 13 years after this book was printed. Thousands were killed in a day. So many were killed that the city of Paris had to pay workers to bury the bodies that kept appearing in the Seine River many days later. Over 1,100 in the river alone, while total estimates reach in the tens of thousands. In 1569, 2 or 3 years before that, but after this book was published, Dutch Anabaptist Dirk Willems was condemned by the Roman Catholic Church and captured and jailed. He subsequently escaped from his prison cell and fled across a frozen moat in winter, only to turn around and rescue the guard who was pursuing him, who fell through the ice because he was heavier. He was recaptured because of this beneficent act and was subsequently burned at the stake. This book was 10 years old when that happened. You see, this book right here is metaphorically dripping with the blood of martyrs. Can you, as my fellow Protestants, see it? But does this ancient book say anything about Sabbath-keepers? What was the view of the Catholic Church at that time in regards to those who believe as we believe? Well, that's interesting. On page 1297, here's another quote. Gregory, servant of the servants of God, to his most beloved sons, the Roman citizens, it has come to my ears that certain men of perverse spirit have sown among you some things which are wrong and opposed to the holy faith, so as to forbid any work being done on the Sabbath day. What else can I call these but preachers of antichrist, who when he comes will cause the Sabbath day as well as the Lord's day to be kept free from all work? And the quote goes on. You can read it in its entirety. The last point that I'll point out about this book is a part of text that made its way into this book, into canon law, that was originally from the donation of Constantine. It's found on page 316 of this book. For those of you who are not familiar with the donation of Constantine, it was a Roman imperial decree supposedly from Constantine and supposedly giving political authority to the Catholic Church. It was later proved to be a forgery. Nevertheless, that didn't stop them from including it in a book which they co-enumerated with canonical scripture. In fact, one of the phrases you may be familiar with. That would be Vicarius Filii Dei, which translates to Vicar of the Son of God, or in place of the Son of God. This title for the Pope has been widely used throughout history, as recently as 1968. But why would I point out a title for the Pope? I told you I had two pieces to show you, and that leads me to my second item. I have 2 pages here from a very old Bible. This Bible is also from the 1500s. In fact, this Bible is from the 1583 Geneva Bible. This predates the King James Bible, but thankfully is still written in English. A Bible just like this, although perhaps a little more completely bound and with all the pages there, sailed across the ocean with the Pilgrims on the Mayflower and landed on Plymouth Rock. This was the text that the founders of the New World had to read and teach from. If these pages could talk, what would they say? Which hands held this Bible? And yet, these pages do talk. These specific pages are from Revelation 13 and 14. the three angels' messages, I wish to draw your attention to the last verse of Revelation 13, which reads as follows. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath wit count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. This number is 666. Do you have wit? If we count up that blasphemous title, Vicarius Filii Dei, with Roman numerals, you do indeed, yet 666. But is this concept of the Pope being Antichrist a foreign concept only brought about by Adventism, or did it exist long before that? I will read an excerpt of the typed footnotes that follow each section and are original to the Geneva Bible, right here. He that is not sealed with Antichrist's mark cannot be suffered to live among men, such as may be understood by man's reason. For about 666 years after this revelation, the Pope, or Antichrist, began to be manifest in the world. And it goes on. Did you catch that? Who did those on the Mayflower believe was the Antichrist? A couple of weeks ago, Pastor Jason shared that his ancestors came over on the Mayflower. Is it not fitting that he is carrying the Protestant torch that his family brought to this new world? I began this talk by counting back through the different wars that this book has survived. Why? Because these two opposing pieces speak of an older war, a war that has been going on since the beginning of this planet, a war that is reaching its final climactic battle. These pages have only become more relevant as time has progressed. In fact, I would say that these two pages of Scripture are more relevant now than when they were first printed in 1583. Did those that print these pages of either of these documents think that they would be highlighted with such intensity long after their death? Since I purchased this book and it arrived at my house on July 18th, a little over 2 weeks ago, these two documents have gotten featured on 3 YouTube videos and have been viewed a combined, when I counted last night, 30,457 times. 30,000 people have now seen a book that has been sitting on a shelf for hundreds of years. A 4th video has been shot and will be released on YouTube channel's Little Light Studios that boasts over 210,000 subscribers. I have Catholic friends who I hope will be able to see the truth as a result of bringing what has been hidden to light. I do not take issue with individual Catholics who have not been shown the truth, but rather the system of worship which is diametrically opposed to God's ways, which do not resort to coercion and violence. When we finish the service, I will have these books in the lobby on a table for you to take a look at and take pictures of, if you want to have a talking point to show someone. My brother James will be there, and he will be happy to turn the pages so that you may see with your own eyes the great controversy that has been going on and is reaching its breathtaking conclusion. There are some of the more ecumenical mindset who are, even in our own ranks, who are trying to deny the existence of Vicarius Filii Dei. But we have physical proof right here. Come take a look and see for yourself after the service. Thank you.